Okay, we've got our cam bearings out like we talked about in the last segment. And if you look at this motor here, I've got the main caps back on with the exception of this one. We put a chain on here. I like to put the chain right here because we have to get the engine off of the hoist to do our next piece of work that we got to do. Now if you look right in here, we've taken the core plugs out. A lot of people call these freeze plugs. Those are not freeze plugs. There's actually a very popular automotive chain that's nationwide that in their computer system they call these freeze plugs. If you go in and say, hey, I need some core plugs for a particular motor, they don't even know what you're talking about. Those are not freeze plugs. The concept of a freeze plug is, well, you know, the reason that plug's in the block is because when the motor freezes it'll pop out and save the block. That's not what that plug is. That plug is there because when they cast these blocks and heads, they cast them in sand cores or sand molds, and once the core is broken out of the mold, they have to have these holes here to get the sand that's left over in the hollow areas out. So it is a core plug. Some people call it an expansion plug. It's definitely not a freeze plug. But we've got all these out, but I want to show you this last one here. The best way to get these out is just take a chisel and kind of knock them in. And if you can, you don't want to knock them all the way in. Sometimes you can't help it. You see how that one kind of fell there? But that's okay, because we can grab it. And I like to take a pair of pliers and just kind of fish it out of there. Sometimes you can wedge it in here sideways. And we take a pair of vice grips, and you just want to put your vice grips on that and just kind of pull that right out. And that's how you get it. Those all have to come out. All the plugs and everything have to come out of this block. So now that we've got all the core plugs and the cam bearings out of this thing, what we want to do is we want to pick it up and take it off of the stand. So if you want to back up there, Daniel, we'll get this thing off of here. We got a chain on here, so we're just going to put it right up to our hoist, because there's some plugs in the back of the block, and in order to get them out, it has to be off of this engine stand. We're pretty much done disassembling anyway. This thing needs to go to the back now. So again, we just want to pick this thing all the way up off the floor, which is the best way. Just take the hoist and pick the whole stand up. It's a little uneven, that's okay. So we've got this hanging on our hoist here, the whole thing. Some guys, what they will do is they'll put the hoist on here and they'll leave the weight of the engine on the stand, and they'll start taking these bolts out of here, and then one side will fall down, and it's just so unnecessary. All you gotta do is just pick the whole thing up like this. Pull the stand right off of there. And then you take your tool. If you have air tools, it works great. You just run these off of here. It shouldn't be made into a 25-minute project getting the engine off and on the stand, but I've seen that happen. We're going to pull all of these off of here, and hopefully we don't lose any of them in the process. And we'll just go ahead and make sure we get our washers here. And sometimes if you got studs, they can be a little tricky to get off, but you pull that off, and so there's the back of our block there. Now if you look at the back of the block here, we're going to set this down on the floor because we have to get the core plugs out of it. Now I want you to look at the front. Right up here in the front, we have oil galleys that run down the entire length of the block, and there's a plug here, and there's a plug way back in there filled with crud. I don't know if you can see that. But what these are is these are little tiny versions of these core plugs that we just pulled out. They're not threaded in. So we have to drive those plugs out from the back side. On the back side, we actually have plugs that will take an Allen head and we can unscrew those. Now, in some cases, you have to drill these out and use an easy out. And I'm hoping that we don't have to do that today, but if we have to, we will. So we're just going to take an Allen wrench and see if we can get on those. One thing that is very helpful is if you take a hammer and you just gently kind of tap on those plugs, and be careful not to damage the block here or anything, but we just want to lightly give that plug a few smacks. And a lot of times if you do that, it'll actually loosen those plugs up to where they'll come out with your Allen wrench. Give them a little smack and they'll loosen up. So we're going to put our tool on here and see what happens. Hopefully these will come out. If not, then we'll walk you through how to drill them out. Yeah, see, these aren't really going to come out of here. I want to get these, at least one of these studs out of the way so I don't kill myself here. So let's try this one here. Yeah, those plugs aren't coming out. So the next step is we have to do this the hard way, which when I say the hard way, it's really not that hard. Just something that has to be done. So we're going to lower the motor down on the floor. Go ahead and get your hoist out of the way. Then we want to set this block up on its end. Now we have access to those 3 plugs I was talking about. I like to use 3 different tools, 3 different pieces of equipment here. We got a small pilot drill that goes in the hole. We got a bigger drill that will shell that plug out, and we got an easy out. So we're just going to go ahead and see how it goes for drilling these. Try to get in the middle of the plug if you can. So you see we got a pilot hole there. Now I'm going to put my bigger drill bit in here. And what this will do is this will pretty much cut the inner diameter of that plug out so we can get an easy out in it. Now the nice thing about this type of plug is because it has an Allen head set up here, when you put a big drill bit in there, the plug, just the way it's designed, will almost automatically center your drill bit. So you just get, you hit the plug at high speed, and the center of the plug just kind of centers your drill bit. You see how I did that? I just hit it real hard, and you can see I'm really close to being centered there. We got a pilot hole, so it shouldn't be too difficult. So let's just gonna go ahead and drill that plug right out of there. And watch that the drill bit doesn't rip your hand off, because they will get stuck at the bottom. So now if you look at that hole, you can see that we didn't touch the threads. We can get our easy out in there. So, and the other thing is that easy out will be fairly easy to use now, because when you drill that plug out of there, what it does for me is it really does a great job of loosening up that plug, and so it just kind of, we just give it a little nudge here and they usually come right loose. So we'll take a look and see how well this works. So, yep, there you go. We couldn't budge it before, but now that we've drilled it, that plug just comes right out of there, just like butter. And there's our plug. Now I want you to take note of all of the crud and the crap that is behind that plug. This is why it is absolutely imperative that you pull these plugs out. Because if you take this block and you get this block vatted and you leave these plugs in, all this sludge is still going to be behind those plugs. The external portion of the block may look clean, but the problem you're going to have is when you put this thing together, all the sludge that's left behind these plugs that the vat will never get out with these plugs in there is now going to be washed down into your brand new bearings, and you're going to ruin your motor. You'll wipe out your bearings very quickly. That is why these plugs have got to come out. So we'll go ahead and do the same thing on the other 2 plugs. And what we do is the plugs in the front, we just take, got this handy little tool here, and what this does is this runs down the block, and we just take and put it in there, and we'll kind of pick the block up a little bit, and I just use this as a driver, and I just knock that front plug right out of there. I do that with all of them, okay? And so that plug is now out of the block. I'm hitting the floor over there. So I'm going to drill these out, knock the front plugs out, and that's about it. After that, we're going to take everything and we're going to go down to the other shop where I have the vat and some other machining equipment, and we're going to clean everything up. Everything's got to be totally vatted and cleaned before we start our inspection. And then we'll start walking through some inspection on this thing and try to come up with a plan for what kind of machine work and a repair we need to do. So that is the last segment of disassembly, and after this we start cleaning, and then we'll get into some and hopefully before we're done we will have walked through an entire rebuild on a small block Ford. So till next time, thanks.